So one thing to note right there, John Trevina, who's one of the attorneys that represents Michael Drejka, you just saw him right there. He was in the news himself. He was arrested on a domestic battery charge in connection with an incident with his wife. That's a little side note. We don't have to get into that, but just something to think about. Let's break down what we've seen so far. Joining me once again is criminal defense attorney Ashley McMahon, and also joining us now is former prosecutor Michelle Haman-Kantor. Great to have you both here. Michelle, I want to start with you. There was a big development this morning and kind of a surprise that Brittany Jacobs, who is the girlfriend of the victim, we learned the prosecution is not planning on calling her. Now, our very own Linda Kenny-Bodden suggested that perhaps that forces the defense to then put the defendant on the witness stand, and then they can call Jacobs as a rebuttal witness. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. I mean, the prosecution has a strategic advantage in figuring out who they want to put on the stand first, and then the defense has to come back from that. So this is a strategic move, and as the opening statements mentioned, Brittany had some words with the defendant, so the prosecution may or may not want that to come out, and is going to force the defendant's hand at that point.
You know what? I stand corrected. There's two Brittany's in this case. That was Brittany Hicks. We haven't heard anything about Brittany Jacobs yet. But interesting nonetheless to hear what the state is planning on doing or not doing. Now, here's another point, and Rash, I want to ask you about this. The one shot, that's the thing that I can't get over here. The fact that we're talking about this one shot that the autopsy revealed, the single shot was a bullet that entered just below the left nipple of McLaughlin. It was lodged in his right armpit. And that one shot, wouldn't this case have been different if the defendant fired, unloaded the whole round at him?
I think the defense is, I'm sorry.
That's
oh,
okay.
Ashley, yeah. Michelle, I'm going to get you in a minute.
So yes, definitely. I mean, if the defendant had unloaded the entire, it looks like the entire clip into this, this victim, I think it would be a much easier argument for the prosecution to say, hey, look, not only did he not fear for his life, but he becomes the aggressor as soon as second or third shot is fired. We've only got one, so I think this actually works in favor for the defense, saying that, look, he only used the amount of deadly force that he thought was necessary to neutralize what he perceived as a threat against him. And I think that the one shot is going to be very helpful to the defense in this case, in order to say, hey, he was assuming this was a threat, and as soon as it was taken care of, as soon as he realized the victim in this case was backing up, he stopped using any deadly force. So yeah, I think it makes a big difference.
Michelle, I mean, what's your perspective? It has to be different also where the shot was placed as opposed to a single shot at the head or something like that, correct?
Absolutely, and I agree with what Ashley said, but I was also going to say the trajectory and where it landed on him would suggest that he was maybe turning away, and that's going to be a point in favor of the prosecution's argument.
Absolutely, because they want to say that he wasn't the aggressor. He saw that gun and he tried to back away. He was no longer a threat. So what we just heard was some witnesses talking about a different incident that happened, not with McLaughlin, but with the defendant and another man, how they got into an altercation very similar about a parking spot and how it almost escalated into violence, trying to show this pattern from the defendant that he's this aggressor with a gun. Let's go back live. A new witness is on the stand. Okay, so it's again all about Richard Kelly and this other incident. Again, Ashley, I want to come back to you about this. The idea that he was carrying this gun, the defendant, and he almost felt emboldened. I mean, he according to Mr. Kelly, the defendant threatened him and said, I should shoot you. That's not good for the defense, that you have this guy walking around with a gun and doesn't fear anybody.
Jesse, I'd say that that's not good for the defense, is putting it mildly. Whenever you have a case where someone is accused of shooting someone else who turns out to be unarmed, there was an altercation involved, and the prosecution is able to establish that there's a pattern of this individual seeking out these types of confrontations, yeah, I'd say it's very bad for the defense, especially when this defendant is claiming, hey, look, I was in reasonable fear for my life and my safety. That just doesn't ring true to a jury once they hear testimony from other witnesses that say, no, this guy was out essentially seeking these altercations and provoking them himself.
Yeah, and Michelle, the idea of what happened here, I mean, he goes around and gets angry at people about where they park their car. We're seeing a related incident about that. So is he this sort of vigilante that goes around and tries to direct people about where they should park their car and he's in the right? I mean, what do you think about this? This all escalated over a parking spot.
That's certainly the picture that the prosecution is painting. And I'm interested in this because oftentimes you can't use a prior bad act against the defendant unless it's more probative to the case than prejudicial. And clearly in this case, the judge felt like this kind of a fact should get in front of a jury. So this is certainly not good for the defense in any way.
Yeah, I mean, like, here's the thing. We just covered a case, Michael Gargiulo, very different, Hollywood Ripper case. But again, other incidents showing a pattern. Here, this pattern is so bizarre that the prosecution is putting forward. And at this point, you got to say it's working. Listen, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll jump live. We don't want you to miss any moment of this trial. And again, the Sean Foley trial is currently live on lawandcrime.com. We'll be right back.